Sounds good.
All right. All right. So in 3, 2, 1, we'll go live. Tonight on the DTD podcast, if you ever rented a video as a kid, you're going to definitely know what we're talking about tonight. We have Taylor Morden in the studio to talk about his fantastic documentary, The Last Blockbuster. So let's get right into it.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
How about no, you crazy Dutch bastard? What we've got here is failure to communicate.
60% of the time, it works every time.
That doesn't make sense.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That's cute. I remember when I had my first beer.
Why so serious?
I am serious, and don't call me so.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the DTD podcast. Both friends and foes are allowed in here, and tonight we talked to Taylor Morden about The Last Blockbuster, and I couldn't be more excited. This came across my radar only about probably a month ago. I got onto it as soon as I could. I watched it, and I'm amazed just at the level of people that he brought into the movie, the storyline of the movie, because you think, it can't be that exciting, but I'm telling you, there's a lot that goes into this. So without further ado, welcome, Taylor.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into this real quick. What made this? I've seen a couple of, I've looked around at a couple of your other things. And most recently, I looked at a movie that you did called Project 88 that you were associated with, where it was like a fan-made, shot-for-shot remake of Back to the Future. So in everything that I see in your documentaries about music or bands or Blockbuster, you have a lot of nostalgia running through you. Is there a reason why you're so addicted to this era instead of doing documentaries about the present time that we're in, other than it's a super depressing time?
Right. I mean, right now sucks. Who wants to talk about that when you can talk about the 80s and 90s? But,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, I was one of those kids in the 80s and in the 90s, and I grew up watching a lot of TV, a lot of movies, getting into music in the 90s, and that really stuck with me. I got a pretty bad case of Arrested Development, and I kind of my brain never stopped thinking about that stuff. And I also, nostalgia wise, that was the last time we had before the internet took everything over, right? So it was the last real era that was different than it is now, as far as, everybody's lifestyle and the way we interact with things like music and movies and pop culture. And so to me, it's like, if you don't go back to the 90s or the 80s or before that, you're just talking about stuff that still exists now. It's kind of the way the world is. So that's the way my brain works. I'm still latched into the 90s pretty hard.
Now, were you all the way through the 80s? Because I was all the way through the 80s, all the way through the 90s. Or were you more slanted towards the 90s? Or were you about my age, so you made it all the way through the 80s too?
Well, I was born in 81.
Okay.
So I'll be 40 this year, and I lived I missed 1980, and I don't really remember 81, 2, or 3, but after that, yeah.
Well, that's when it really started kicking off, was about 84 was when it really got going. So why Blockbuster? I mean, there was a ton of stuff that you could do movies about nostalgia back then. We talked about Back to the Future and stuff like that. What stood out to this story to you so much?
Well, this story really kind of found me. I had been living on the East Coast, and my wife and I decided to move back to Oregon, where I'd spent a lot of my childhood and where she grew up. And we moved back to a town called Bend, Oregon, which is not a big town. It's about 90,000 people here. And when we did that, this was 2015, 2016, around then. And, we came from a big city to a small town, and everything was kind of a culture shock, but the biggest difference I noticed was that there was still a Blockbuster Video here.
Right.
uh, and I saw the sign, and actually there was one right by my house here that was going out of business the week we moved here, so in 2015, and we didn't have any of our stuff yet. It was being shipped over in like a pods situation.
Right.
Um, so we were just here. We had like a car full of clothes and sleeping bags and our dog, and that's it. And then I saw this Blockbuster going out of business. So the first thing I did before we had any furniture, I went and bought a whole stack of DVDs. You know, they're going out of business sale.
Yeah.
DVDs, video games, stuff like that. And then that was it. I thought they were just gone. And I would drive around Bend and see this sign, you know, one of those big, the iconic Blockbuster signs up on the
Right.
big pole. Um, but knowing that that one had gone out of business and knowing full well that they were all out of business, you know, I'm no dummy. I know there's no Blockbuster Video in 2017,
Right.
2016. But one day I stopped in just out of curiosity because I saw the sign. This was a separate location. I thought, well, they can't be open, but it'll be fun to go check out the drop box or see the skeleton of the store. They certainly haven't rented it out. But what I found was a fully functional, you know, as if nothing had ever changed, Blockbuster Video. And I walked in and they had all the new releases. It looked the same, it felt the same, it smelled the same as I remembered. And it was just like stepping into a time warp back to the 90s. And at that time, I had just finished my first movie. I fancied myself a filmmaker. And so, first thing I did is find the manager and ask her, hey, would it be okay if I start bringing cameras around here and filming? Because I have so many questions. You know, who are these people? How are you in business?
Right.
Why DVDs? There's no Blu-ray. You know, what's going on here? And yeah, that was almost 4 years ago now, and the movie just came out. So I've been kind of living and breathing Blockbuster Video for a while.
You know, I think people have kind of a love-hate relationship with Blockbuster from being a kid. In my town, I grew up in a small town. There wasn't any Blockbusters there. I didn't see them until I got a little older, maybe like high school, college age, in the military and stuff like that. That was the first time I was really around Blockbuster. Now, I used them a lot more then. But I remember people talking about Blockbusters about, first off, you had the mom and pops, you know, that everyone went to, and it had everything, and they knew you, and it even had the little beaded curtain to go in the back and rent, all that kind of stuff. And then Blockbuster comes on the scene. They're very family oriented. They're very kind of just they're almost like a dragon from the beginning. I mean, they just start kind of crushing competition right off the bat, like with no time at all. But you hear people saying they don't like it because it doesn't have that friendly atmosphere, or it's too much, or they charge late fees, or the rewind fees, or anything like that. In all the research that you did on this, did you come across anybody talking like that? Because, and granted, the documentary talks a lot about people's love for it. Did you come across any of that where you had some kind of hate for Blockbuster other than Mr. Kaufman?
Right. You know, when we started, we thought we would. Because Zeke, my producer, and I, we were both of that era, and we were both, you know, fans of the local video store. And
Right.
Blockbuster was the big corporate meanie that came in and drove everybody out of business. They were the Walmart of video stores, right? And the mom and pop stores were the local businesses. And I was the kind of person, I also didn't have a Blockbuster in my town. I lived in such a small town, I rented movies at the local gas station.
That's exactly
That's
where I
got
did.
Yep. And it was a 1/4 mile walk, or I could ride my bike, but it was a highway, so it was sketchy. But but later, you know, high school and college, I grew fond of Blockbuster purely because they always had the new releases. You know, I would go to the mom and pop store to get the cool indie movies.
Right.
You know, the weird, you know, obscure stuff, or like just whatever, you know, because the people there would recommend something cool and you could watch something and whatever, but they would never have the new releases. They wouldn't have The Matrix to save their life, right? They'd have all these cool movies I'd never heard of. So then I would also go to Blockbuster, and then, you know, a couple days later I'd have to go back and return to both stores. But I really thought going into this that everybody would have this anger, you know, this rage they were holding on to for this corporation that put all the video stores out of business.
Right.
But I think we really didn't come across that, and I think maybe it's either been enough time, or people are so nostalgic for just renting movies in general that, you know, yes, Blockbuster was the big bad corporation of video renting, but all video rental stores are gone now, so you can't really hold it against them.
Yeah, well, and you say that just recently, within like the past week, maybe week and a half, Family Video has gone out of business now, and they're liquidating all their stuff. I think they have like, I don't know, like 30 days left or something like that. But I've seen a lot on like Facebook and people just posting, hey, went there and bought all these movies for, next to nothing. And it was funny to me in your movie where they talk about it, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he said he knew they were going out of business, so he just went and rented a bunch of movies and video games, and he was like, well, you're not getting these back because you're not going to need them anyway.
Right.
And so I think that was kind of his small way of getting back at Blockbuster for all those late fees, rewind fees. So, the thing that I remember most about, like you said, growing up, I rented at the gas station by my house too. And I always remember, like you said, the obscure. Now, they didn't have a ton of movies there. They had like, I think 2 shelves worth. And
Mine too.
I always remember Chopping Mall. I always remember the VHS of Chopping Mall with the robot hand and the bag that came with it. And I own that now. I own that movie. I never got to see it then, but that is what I think made people love those small outlets, because you could go into them, and if they did rent games, you could play the game systems. They always had a game system there that you could play, or they always gave recommendations on what they thought. With that, how do you think that we went from there to these giant corporations? Because, you go from these mom and pops to Blockbuster, which takes over pretty much everything. Then Hollywood Video jumps in the middle of it. Then Family Video jumps in the middle. And by the end of it, we're down to redbox. But it's everywhere. It's on every corner. So how do we go from there to there? Do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, and we got into that a little bit in the documentary, and that was all stuff I learned doing the research and everything. But basically what happened is the people with the money found out that this was making money. That basically, I think the owner of this small town store says in the 80s and 90s, it was basically like printing money. If you could afford to open a video store,
right,
you were going to make all the money. And I think with any industry, as soon as like the big corporate entities get a hold of that, get a whiff of that, like, oh, this is profitable. Well, we have enough money to open 5,000 stores. Let's make all the money. And we can, it's the same thing that McDonald's did to the local burger joint. It's just what happens when any one thing catches on like that. And, you talk about Redbox now, it was genius what they did, putting them, because basically like you and I grew up renting in the gas station.
Right.
Well, I don't know about yours, but I'm sure my gas station now has a Redbox at it.
Yes, it does.
Instead of that shelf of DVDs, because it's easier. They collect the rent basically from Redbox, and Redbox makes all that money. And convenience is what we've seen winning out. I mean, that's why, Amazon, Netflix, Hulu, and all that are the kings of the castle now, because you can't compete with convenience. I mean, Redbox is in every grocery store across the country, basically, and every 7-Eleven and every gas station. And you can't, if you're a mom and pop store, you can't compete with that any more than you could compete with Blockbuster or Hollywood Video. But Blockbuster, they were kind of mean about it. And we got into that in the movie too, because the store we follow, the last one, it was a mom and pop local store. It was called Pacific Video.
Yep.
And basically Blockbuster came in and said, we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse, right? You're going to be a Blockbuster or you're going to go out of business.
Right.
And they did that all across the country, all around the world. And so that kind of corporate greed and bullying, it's not unique to video stores, but it's very exaggerated. Like, you can clearly see the trajectory over the late 80s and early 90s of Blockbuster just going in and becoming the thing that wiped everything out.
And I think to that point, you talk about it in the movie, they continued that. I don't know if I guess it would be a bullying. When Netflix came to them and said, hey, work with us. Let's, we've got this great idea. And they laughed him out of the boardroom. And so you see that continuation of almost that idea too big to fail, and it really bit him in the ass in the end because, something about Reed Hastings, I think you say it in the story, he had like $40 worth of late fees at Blockbuster, which made him want to start Netflix. Now, what's amazing to me, though, talking about Netflix and Amazon and stuff like that is you have all these streaming, which I stream a ton of stuff now. And I'm a huge movie fan. I probably have, I don't know, probably 700 to 1,000 DVDs, maybe another 300 VHS. I've collected them ever since I was a kid. But now I've gone to streaming and digital. But it's amazing to me to see when you go to CVS or the grocery store, how many people are still using the redbox, how many people are still using that physical form of media. And I think, like you said, with that convenience, do you think that those red boxes will be around for quite a while? Because there's really no overhead on them. They have your credit card, so if you don't bring the movie back, I mean, there's practically no overhead at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great business model. I think of it from the standpoint of the filmmakers and the studios and the movies. Like, I think Adam Brody says it in our doc, but like, at what point are they just going to stop making DVDs and Blu-rays?
Yeah.
Because if you look at like Walmart and Target and Best Buy, a couple of years ago, the DVD section was like 3 aisles. It had, a horror section, a comedy section, a new release section, all that. I was in a Target a couple weeks ago. It's like half an aisle, and part of it is, T-shirts and action figures. And they have the Star Wars movies and like a 5-pack of 80s action hits, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And that's not because people aren't making movies. That's supply and demand. That means that people aren't buying physical media the way they used to. And so at a certain point, I think for Redbox especially, if they can't keep stocking new movies because somebody at Netflix decides, it's just not worth it to put Tiger King on DVD, people will watch it. That why make them? Why produce them? I'm always going to put movies. We're coming out with our movie on VHS in a couple weeks.
Can we talk about that? Because that is,
of course,
I absolutely love how it came out. You have the Blockbuster Special Edition. Now that's the first Blockbuster Special Edition since 2011, correct?
Yeah, first Blockbuster exclusive DVD Blu-ray since 2011, and we can't pin down the exact last movie because they were doing so many all at once, and then they pulled the plug. But we know that there hasn't been one, and we just talked to the store, and we're for this store, we're now the #1 documentary for sales of all time. So
wow,
got these big Blockbuster
congratulations.
Well, I don't think a lot of people went in and bought An Inconvenient Truth at Blockbuster. So we're
it definitely was in that bargain bin when they were going out of business. It was definitely there.
Right. I've seen our movie now because they loaded up a huge rental wall, and it's still on the rental wall. It's still a new release, of course, but it's already, there's previously viewed copies. People already buy previously viewed DVDs of this movie, and it makes me giggle a little bit. Like, we always wanted to finish the movie while the store was still open. Spoiler for the documentary, but people can Google it and they'll know it's open.
Right.
But when we got that DVD on that shelf, it was like we had achieved this big monumental goal that we had set out to do.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you. It's got to be surreal. Like, all this time you spent in Blockbusters growing up and stuff, and then your movie is on the wall. It's got to be, like, super surreal to walk into that.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I had made a couple movies before, and when I first went in there 4 years ago, I had a movie that I had just finished, and I said, hey, can you put this on the shelf in the special interest? It was another documentary. And when that first happened, back in 2017, it was that surreal feeling of, I've got a movie on Blockbuster Video. I know it's just this one, and I know it's not a huge deal to most people, but it was a big deal to me as someone who grew up loving Blockbuster Video. And now to think that, we've got the first Blockbuster exclusive in a decade, and we've got, the #1 movie on the shelf now, and the best selling documentary at Blockbuster. Yeah, there's only one Blockbuster. We're in all of them,
Yeah, but
cool.
But here's the thing. You now, even with this, you now are part of Blockbuster history. there's no way they can talk about Blockbuster ever in the future and not talk about you guys. It's impossible. You made the documentary about the last Blockbuster. You always have to be included in that conversation. They always have to invite you to the table now. And that is an amazing thing to think about. This we say over and over, this behemoth that was just crushing people out of the way and pushing people out of the way. And even Netflix, in your movie, is the final testament of Blockbuster. That's amazing.
That is pretty cool, and I do love, when you start making a documentary, you tell people, you tell everybody, hey, I'm working on a movie about Blockbuster videos. For the past 4 years, to my friends and family, I'm like the Blockbuster guy, right? I get this attached to me, and I don't mind because I love movies, and basically I feel like it's just a badge that says I love movies, and what do you like? Let's talk about it. And my other documentaries too about music, it's like I love talking about this stuff. I love making these movies, so I don't mind it. But now it's like I do feel like I'm a part of this very small Blockbuster family now. That's Sandy, the manager, and Ken, the owner, and the 5 or 6 kids that work there now. It's during 2020 they had to kind of downsize a little bit because they can't really have a lot of people in the store, and it's the COVID regulations. So it's a lot of online business. So they've kind of changed the way they do things. But I'm in there every month or so, dropping off DVDs and seeing everything. And it is a surreal feeling to be like part of this. It is like a family there. It's weird that Blockbuster is now a small family business, but it is.
That's what I was just about to say. What we talked about in the beginning. Now when you go in there, they know you.
Yep.
And they talk about it a little in the film. You've got one that says, if you're a regular, to have either out your license or your membership card or whatever, and they know that you're a regular there. But did they really ever know you were a regular there? I mean, they talk about it in the movie. They had people wrapped around the store just to check out the video, just to check out at the front counter. So did they ever really know anyone until they got small? And it seems, once again, we go back to the same word, and I hate to say it again, but so surreal that they were this big, faceless corporation, and now they've been reduced to what they destroyed.
Yeah. I think it was a gradual transition for this store in particular. And Sandy, who's the manager, kind of the main character in our movie, when she started there in 2004, that was the peak. That was when Blockbuster had the most locations, 9,000 something locations all around the world, and the corporate machine was running. DVDs were the biggest thing in the world, and it was the most profitable, craziest time for Blockbuster. So she's been on the whole ride down to what they are now. Right. And I think that what you're talking about knowing the regulars and it feeling like the local mom and pop video store, that was a transition over the past 17 years now, of they had this corporate control. And in Bend here in Central Oregon, it's a small, like I said, 90,000 people now. In 2004 it was probably 60,000, and there were 4 Blockbusters here. Which is
that's crazy
to think about.
I mean,
so they didn't
really
know their
go
regulars
anywhere
that well. Yeah, because it was too big. It was crazy. But over the past 10 years or so, you definitely do see, like Jared, the local film critic who's in our movie. Every time I go in Blockbuster, I see him. I recognize him, and the employees know him, and I know all the employees now, and they do have regulars. There's people, they know they're going to come in every couple weeks, and they're going to want the new release, and they're going to want a recommendation for a Western because they love Westerns. When this guy comes in, if there's a new Clint Eastwood movie, you're going to make his week, right?
Right.
They know that.
He's like 175 and still making movies. It's unbelievable about Clint Eastwood. I think he's got like 2 movies coming out next year. So
of course he does.
So when you talk about that, and you talk about the store in general, and you said they've had to switch kind of to online sales and stuff. They've really gotten creative about how they make money at this store. I mean, I think she knits like wool caps now, and they sell bumper stickers and all that kind of stuff. And it's so funny to see how creative they've gotten just to keep this store open, because it's just the thing that won't go away. And I think in that area, I don't think that town's going to let it go away. It seems like it has a very good following behind it. And you mentioned like people come in and they want the new release and they want a recommendation for a Western. But we go back to streaming. If they just look there, there's a million Westerns on there. I mean, you can see stuff that's in Italian. You can see stuff from, you know, and still they go to get that human interaction.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that's hurt them the most during COVID is that, you know, while it was more convenient, it's always been more convenient to turn on Netflix and watch a movie, that human interaction kind of kept them going and made it cool. You know, I was like a kid that loved going to the video store and would spend an hour browsing or more, and not even browsing, but talking to whoever I was with. We would just go look at the movie boxes and laugh. Like, why did they make this bad ripoff of a Friday the 13th movie? Oh, it must be terrible. Let's look at them. Actually, we rent it? No. Okay. And we do that for 50 movies in a night.
Yep.
And you still see people doing that at Blockbuster, at least before COVID hit. You'd still see people in there having so much fun, smiling, looking at the difference between what that experience is like and sitting on your couch going, no, I don't want to watch that. No, I don't want to watch that. No, I don't want to watch that. It's night and day. And I do think the town is going to hang on to it as long as we can. And it's now kind of a point of pride. It's like a tourist destination. We've got the last blockbuster in the world, and there's people coming from all over the world just to see it. So it's pretty cool.
They've even kind of hooked up with Airbnb, and you can stay the night and watch, and it's set up like an 80s living room. And I mean, they've gotten really creative. But talking about when you go to when you look through the boxes and stuff, I think that is an art form that's gone away, because if you look back in the day and you look through we'll talk about the 80s and 90s that we grew up in, that was the most amazing cover art of anything. Like, it could be the shittiest movie in the world, and if it had an awesome cover art, you were going to rent it. And it might even change your mind that it's a good movie. Mm-hmm. Just because of the cover art.
Exactly. And the beauty was, in the era before the internet, you know, you couldn't look it up. You couldn't see the trailer. You know, now there's people in Blockbuster now, they'll pick up a box and go, well, this looks interesting. And then they'll watch the trailer on their phone to see if they want to rent it, which is great. And convenience is great. But there was that mystery back in the 80s and 90s where you'd look and you'd be like, well, I guess they did make another Pauly Shore movie. Well, it's probably a comedy because his movies are comedies. And look, it's got a goofy thing on I'll get it. Or you'd see like those painted covers where it's has almost nothing to do with the movie itself. None of the people who are in it are on the cover, and it's it's like a weird skull with dragon wings or something. And as a 12-year-old boy, that was exciting. Like, oh, that's gonna be cool. This one's got fire on it.
Yep.
It's got whatever. And you'd find those gems, and often they were terrible movies.
Yeah.
But sometimes they weren't, or it didn't matter because we were so starved for content. Like, I watched a lot of bad movies as a kid, and I probably didn't realize movies could be bad until I was 15, 16 years old. I just thought all movies are great.
But here's the thing. I love those movies.
Beastmasters 2.
Oh, yeah. Great movies.
They're great movies, but
what is that?
Not.
Rip Torn that's in there. That was like Conan's alcoholic brother that hung out. Yeah, great movie though. Tanya Roberts. I can't remember what was his name. Dar.
I don't remember.
I think the Beastmaster's name was like Dar or something like that. But
I know he had ferrets.
Yeah. I listened to a podcast where they talked about, kind of to get off topic for a minute, but I listened to a podcast where they talked about that movie being made. They kind of made fun of the movie. There was so much animal cruelty going on that set. Like the black tiger, that was a spray painted tiger. Like they spray painted it like daily, and I think they went through a couple different sets of ferrets and stuff. Like, but that was movies back then. Like they, they put that disclaimer up there: no animals were harmed during the filming. Yeah, but as soon as the camera shut off, they were getting tossed in the dumpster or whatever. I mean, that was the way movies were made. And when you go back, I think that the 80s is probably the greatest era of movies that have ever come out. And I
don't disagree.
I do another show with a buddy of mine called Metal and Movies, and we break down a classic album or a classic movie. And when you look through you can look through select years of the 80s, like 84 and 86, and just the amount of classics that came out in one year is unbelievable when you start looking at the lists and stuff. And you really don't see that anymore. What you do see, though, is a lot of independent filmmakers like yourself really making a splash now. Like people are really starting to set up and pay attention.
Well, the barrier to entry has dramatically lowered. In the 80s, if you weren't part of the system, you couldn't afford like a film camera to shoot a movie, any movie at all. The worst independent movies you can think of cost twice as much as any movie I've made. And that's just the economics of it and the way the system worked, and it was much more difficult. And now, people are shooting movies on their iPhones that are winning awards all over the place, and that's great. That's kind of the world. But yeah, to your point of them not making as many movies, you think about the 80s and like 84, 85, 86. Mm-hmm. Each one of those years has 20 movies that stick with us, and how many of those came out in 2019? I don't know. 2, maybe.
Yeah, you're exactly right. 2019, and then when you look forward to 2021, Warner Brothers just made that big announcement that everything that they have that's big is coming to HBO Max. So how big? And this is a question to you: how big are movies now? We've lost cinema, we've lost video rental stores. You and I have talked and said, everything is on digital. Where are we at with movies? Are we in a not a panic mode, but are we close to losing the movie industry?
It's possible. It's hard to say. I think independent film is going to stick around forever, but I think of it a lot like what happened to the music industry in the late 90s.
Okay.
In the late 90s, a CD was $18, and they were selling like crazy. MTV was still playing videos. Radio was how most people got their music. It was the biggest thing. It was amazing, the amount of money that was going through the music industry. And then Napster hit, and then piracy happens, and then you can burn CDs, and it all kind of went away in just a couple of years. And the independent artists who were never making $1 million, it didn't affect them. They're still making $500 playing a gig and on to the next, or selling their t-shirts or whatever it was. And people had to learn how to cope in that new economy where you're not going to get the $1 million record deal, but you can still make the art if that's what you're doing it for. And you can reach with the internet, with Napster, you could reach more and more and more people than you ever could before. You're not just selling your cassette tapes out of the trunk of your car now, right, but you're not going to make that money. So if you think about the way that's happening with movies, because everything is streaming now, and anybody can put their movie up on Amazon Prime, but Amazon Prime pays independent filmmakers 6 cents an hour on the high end, and it goes down to 1 cent an hour for people watching your movie.
Well, the more popular it gets, doesn't it go down? The more and more people start watching.
The more popular it is, the more money you make.
Okay, because I was thinking that they switched it around, because I was talking to someone and I thought they had said it was the opposite, that because they can make their money back, but it takes forever.
Right. And without theaters, so theaters, that's where the big studios make their money back, right? James Bond will open, it'll make $300 million in the first weekend, and they're even. They're good. The Avengers makes $1 billion worldwide just in theaters, before it ever hits streaming. Stuff like that. And that's great for the $1 billion movies. They need that. But if that goes away, you're still going to have people like me making movies for under $100,000, and we'll be able to make that money back slowly. One, I sell DVDs out of my garage still for my first couple of movies, and I'm willing to make the money back $15 at a time.
Right.
But the big studios are not willing to do that. So it could affect the industry for people like me for the better. Where there is
Absolutely.
more opportunity for independent film and for people to find that. 2020 was awful for a lot of reasons, but I think we're lucky to have put out a movie in 2020 when Hollywood had shut down and there weren't a lot of movies coming out. The movies that were done were put on hold. Black Widow still isn't out,
Right.
right? But we were able to put ours out and we filled that little window. I think more people are watching it now on Amazon, on iTunes, on Fandango, or wherever because Hollywood didn't put out 10 movies in December. They put out Wonder Woman, and that's it.
Yeah, and the whole thing with that, I had talked to another guy about a movie he had made, and it was really like seriously in the middle of the quarantine, and a lot of drive-ins were released in theaters. Well, his was a small film. I think he made it for like 200,000, 250,000, something like that. It was a found footage horror film, and he was like, they put me in drive-in theaters, and I was the number one movie for 2 weeks in America because they put me in drive-ins because there were no theaters. And I thought, man, that's a cool badge of honor to kind of wear. I was the number one movie. No slight at it being an independent film. It shows that people still wanted to get out there, and I think that the more we talk about that, where they make these billion-dollar movies, they can go one of two ways. Those billion-dollar movies can flop too, and we've seen a lot of them in the past 5 years really take a hard nosedive. I mean, even you mentioned Wonder Woman coming out in December. That's getting horrible. It dropped on Rotten Tomatoes today or yesterday.
Yeah.
It's just you're dumping all this money into it, and then guys like you come along who just want to make a film and, damn the rules, and you go out. And I think that's what's really going to, that resilience is what's going to really come out of this thing in movies. And I think we're going to see a lot more film that way. And this is the time to strike right now.
Yeah, I hope so. I do think, if movie theaters survive this, they are going to be looking for content. And if the studios are going straight to streaming like they've all said they're going to do, then it's going to be, who doesn't still want that experience of going to the movie theater, getting the popcorn, and now they all sell beer, and it's like a whole fun thing. The cool theaters that have the couches and the vibe and all that. I love those. And I don't care. I don't want to see Wonder Woman like that, but I do want to see the indie movie that isn't playing anywhere else, that isn't on Netflix, that isn't on Hulu, that somebody just made for the love of movies. That belongs in these theaters. And if there's talk of like Cinemark and AMC are going to be bought out by Amazon or Netflix even, and so what, are they only going to show Amazon original movies? I don't think so. That doesn't make any sense. They don't make enough movies. It's not a logical thing.
Yeah.
So I think they're always going to want content, and we're never going to have the era like the 80s and 90s when people who were making independent movies, they were on the shelf of Blockbuster right next to the Hollywood movie. You and I would go and we'd be like, do I want Transformers or Transmorphers?
I was hoping you were going to say that movie. What is that, the Asylum studio that does all those?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there were more even so in the 80s when you could really fool people. If you could just make a movie at all, it would be at all the rental stores and it would be right next to the $500 million movie. Well, they weren't that expensive back then, but and back then people didn't know. I have no idea to this day how much it cost them to make Ghostbusters, and I don't care. But everybody knows that Spider-Man's going to be $250 million. It's like that's what we talk about. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's not about the art anymore. It's about how much they've put money into it or how much the studio has backed it up. And, some of my favorite films are independent. One of my top three, No Country for Old Men, is a very Hell or High Water. They're very independent film. I know they've got some big people attached to them, some big names attached to them, but they have that very much where it wasn't widely released. People didn't, and I have a feeling that these studios, these small studios, the only thing I worry about with these small studios is they seem to, once they kind of catch fire, they get bought out by a bigger studio. Like if you look at like Blumhouse, I mean, it started out making some great horror movies, and then Universal said, hey, come over here, we'll build you haunted houses for our theme park in Halloween. You can make all the Halloweens. And I'm not saying that their movies aren't good anymore, because they're fun popcorn movies. But they took that independent streak and sold out to the bigger studio to kind of get that security blanket. Yeah. And so that's what I worry about in the future is when I ask you about the movie industry as a whole, it seems to me like everyone is looking for a security blanket right now. Or a lot of people are.
Yeah. I mean, who wouldn't be, right? If I was at the Blumhouse level from 10 years ago and somebody offered me, hey, we got all the money in the world. You can make whatever you want. You got to follow a few corporate rules and you'll be fine. Right. I would have taken that deal. I'm sure most independent filmmakers would. Because it takes away the risk. Like you said, it's a security blanket. It's a safety net. It makes it so, you can take those risks. No independent filmmaker could make a Wonder Woman 84 because no, we can't afford to lose $200 million.
Right.
But Warner Brothers can. They can make all these DC movies, and some of them will make a little bit of money overseas, and some of them can tank. But as long as overall HBO Max is getting the subscribers, they don't care. They don't need these movies all to succeed. Whereas if you're me, or if you're someone else making independent films and you make one movie that doesn't break even, you're out all that money.
Right.
And it's rough to try to get back on your feet and make the next one.
How do you sell that to your wife and family?
It was a hard sell. What happened was...
can I hear this pitch meeting for the Last Blockbuster to your wife?
Well, the Last Blockbuster was easier because I didn't have to travel that much for it. It was here in town. And I had just put out my first movie. The week that I started Blockbuster, I had just released my first movie. We had gone... it's about a band in Arizona, so we went to Phoenix for the premiere, and she got to do the red carpet thing, and it was a good time to ask if I could start another movie. We were high off of, this is what making movies is like. This is so exciting. And that movie had also broken even and was starting to make a little bit of money.
Okay.
So it's not like I hadn't proven that I could do it. But for the first movie, it was a big ask. It was, I had some money in savings from filming weddings and real estate and commercials and things like that for several years. And we had just moved back to Oregon, and it was either make a movie or get a job. And I had filled out applications and gone on interviews and looked at these job offers, and I went, God, if that's what I can make doing that, I think I should try to make a movie and see if that works. And to my wife's credit, she gave me 1 year. She said, if you can, you've got enough in savings, you can't fund the movie. You're going to have to do a Kickstarter, but you can pay your half of the bills for 1 year. And that was 5 years ago, and I've made 3 movies since then, and they're all kind of doing okay. I don't make as much as I would probably at a decent full-time job, but I make a little bit of money, and I'm doing what I love, and we're not starving. So that's how she gave me 1 year 5 years ago. We haven't revisited the conversation.
Oh, good. Well, at least there wasn't like we should check back in on this, but what is it about documentaries with you? Because documentaries, as I get older and older, have become my favorite kind of film, just to kind of learn, and it gives it. What is it about documentaries that draw you to them? Because this is what, your third
three
documentary.
features.
Yeah, third
Yeah.
documentary. Yeah. So what is it that draws you to the documentary?
Well, foolishly, when I was starting out, I thought it would be easier. It's not. I've done I've done some
Oh.
work on narrative films, and I've done a bunch of shorts, and I can tell you, it's not easy. I mean, Blockbuster, it's out now. It took almost 4 years to make, and that's working at least part time on it for 4 years, and some weeks way more than full time. But um, I love them as a subject matter, and certainly for the nostalgia. If I wanted to make a period piece that took place in the 80s, I can't afford that. You
Oh
know,
no.
the cars alone are way out of my budget, but I can tell a story about the 80s through a documentary, or about the 90s, or whatever. You just can. The barrier to entry is very low because I don't need a writer, I don't need a script, I don't need, a crew of 50 people and actors and contracts and hair and makeup and all these things. And there is a lot of contracts, and we did have hair and makeup. We did end up having a lot of those things, but to start out, it just seemed more accessible. Like, I've got a camera and I've got a microphone, I can make a documentary.
Right.
Turns out there's a lot more to it than that, and it's a lot of work and takes a whole lot of people. But
I've learned that
I
just
don't
in
know.
podcasting. I mean, it's
Yeah,
I have a full-time job, and the extra time that it takes to watch movies or read books or, get stuff ready, people have no idea how much goes into it, editing and all that kind of stuff. But when you talk about that, you have some pretty big names in your movie. How did that come about? I mean, because you've got you've got some Hollywood royalty in there.
yeah, I think we do. And that was, well, like I said, we were working on it for 4 years. And so we started, Zeke, my producing partner, and I, we started years ago. We made a list of everybody we thought would be great to talk about Blockbuster Video or to talk about video renting. And we knew, Quentin Tarantino got his start at a video store, and so did Kevin Smith, and so did, a lot of people.
Paul Scheer.
And Paul Scheer got his start at a video store, Adam Brody. And so they were all on the list from day one. And we kind of just started with who we knew. My partner on the movie used to work in Hollywood. He was a writer on the Weird Al Show and Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls. And he was kind of connected a little bit. But his good friend from back then was James Arnold Taylor, the voice actor. He's Obi-Wan Kenobi and all the Star Wars things. So that was our first.
By the way,
interview.
not to cut you off, the best Star Wars stuff other than The Mandalorian is the stuff that guy's in. Is fantastic Star Wars stuff.
Yeah. No, he's a great guy, and I was geeking out, just getting to meet him and talk about Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and he was also one of the Ninja Turtles. I'm a huge Ninja Turtle fan.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was Leonardo in the mid 2000s movie. But he's just a great guy, and what happens, and this happened with my other documentaries too, is you tell people you're making a movie about Blockbuster, and it starts to spread. So he's friends with somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows Kevin Smith, right? And that was how we did the bulk of it. That's how Jamie Kennedy came about also. And with him, we didn't even know he had that great connection to Blockbuster. We just thought, how cool would it be to have him talk about his character from Scream, who was this video store clerk?
Right.
And he dropped that bomb on us of, my first real job in Hollywood was Blockbuster Video. We had no idea.
He was part of the Adventure Crew or something like that, the Blockbuster Crew.
Blockbuster Entertainment Team.
That's right.
Jim Gaffigan.
Yeah,
And,
wow.
we reached out to Jim Gaffigan. He did not want to revisit his time on the Blockbuster Entertainment Team. No
He's
surprise,
too
same
busy
with
selling
Quentin
minivans
Tarantino.
right now. I think he's doing minivan commercials now. But, when you talk about that and you talk about guys like Paul Scheer, a lot of people, if you ask on the surface, don't know who Paul Scheer is, but he's got his finger in everything in Hollywood. One of his best friends, Jason Mantzoukas, all of these, that's how I got into podcasting, was their podcast. How Did This Get Made? And it really made me
one of my favorites too.
Yeah, it made me want to make a podcast. because of them. But you see these guys that people don't really know. They're like, hey, I know that guy. He's in this because he's in so much stuff, but they have no idea like the history that they know. I mean, Paul does another podcast called Unspooled. Is it? Yeah, Unspooled, where he does the like top 100 movies of all times. Like the knowledge that these guys have from their time at Blockbuster. You look at like Quentin Tarantino and Kevin Smith, and that's how they got it going. I was never into it where I had a video rental job or anything. I worked at a grocery store, but from those video rental stores and all those movies that we talked about, those crap movies and stuff like that, that's where I built my knowledge, was in all of these kind of films. Is it the same way with you where it was just hit and miss and you compiled what you liked and what you didn't like, and then taste change and you now like what you didn't like? And is that how it was for you too?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I was very limited at that gas station movie rack, so I rented all those movies, and I liked what I liked, and I was, yeah, taste changed. I think in the '80s I was real big into Pauly Shore movies and Revenge of the Nerds and stuff like that. But I was also into Star Wars and Back to the Future, and I'm still very much into Star Wars and Back to the Future. And I think it's I'm real into liking stuff. Like I like Wonder Woman 84. I like The Mandalorian, and I also like Episode 9, which nobody likes. Right?
You lost me on that. I think you cut out.
You
What
go.
was that last part?
That's the thing. I'm just over hating on stuff, especially movies. Once I learned how hard it was to make a movie, like any movie, the fact that they even exist is a miracle. The whole world is telling you you can't make this, you're never going to finish this, it's never going to come out, and that's the same whether you're making a $5,000 movie or a $500 million movie. And so, when something like Wonder Woman comes out and everybody's like, it's not as good as it should have been. I'm like, yeah, but the scene in the mall was fun. Come on, guys. Let's have fun. Let's like stuff.
Isn't that the same mall that was used in Chopping Mall and Commando? I think it's in L.A. I'm almost positive it's the same, and it was used in Stranger Things.
There you go, and I love it, and I would like to go there.
Yeah, it's there. As a matter of fact, it's right across from where they film. How Did This Get Made?
Oh. Well,
It's
fantastic.
I can't think of the theater name, but it's right across the street from it. They talk about it all the time. So yeah, it's still around, and I love that stuff. Like the '80s, like I said, were the best era to me ever. Movie wise, music wise, everything. '90s, I was a little older, so I liked different things than I did in the '80s. I was a kid. I wanted to be Indiana Jones, and I had a bullwhip and a fedora, and I looked really stupid. Walking around with a bullwhip and a fedora on it at 8 years old. There was something that I would like to talk to you about with Lloyd Kaufman. How you came across Lloyd Kaufman for the movie, and he, of all the people that are in the movie, he had the most disdain for Blockbuster, and he's known in Hollywood. I don't think he's ever lost a nickel on a movie. In all the stuff. And I think he started out some great guys. Didn't James Gunn do Toxic Avenger? And now he's one of the biggest guys in Hollywood.
Yeah, and the South Park guys came out of there.
Right. So first off, how do you find him to talk about this? How do you know that he doesn't like these guys? And then two, when you talk to him, it's a very short, I think it's like 120 seconds, they say in the movie.
Yeah.
Can we go into that conversation a little bit? Because I would love to hear it, because he just was spitting venom. Like he was angry about these guys.
Yeah. Well, he was on my list and my producer's list purely out of respect. We thought it's great to talk to Hollywood people who've been in Hollywood movies, but what about the independent people? And I knew from growing up that Troma movies weren't at Blockbuster, at least not at the corporate Blockbusters.
Right.
So I thought, well, he's going to have an interesting take. He's going to be the pro mom and pop store and the anti-Blockbuster guy. And that's great, because we needed that, because we were finding that most people just were looking back with rose-colored glasses and thinking, man, movie renting was fun, and they weren't giving us those sound bites that we knew were out there. The anti-corporate thing, and we figured maybe Lloyd will give us that. And I was in New York working on another documentary, the ska music one that came out last year, and somebody had canceled. So my cinematographer and I, we had like half a day free, and we're like, well, who do we know in New York that might be cool to get for this Blockbuster one? And Lloyd had been on our list, but we hadn't reached out or anything. We just figured, one day we'll catch him at a horror movie convention or something.
Right.
It'll be great because he does all those. He'll come to your town for his movie screening if there's 50 people there. He's great like that. And he has that independent spirit that I really resonate with, where it's like he's still selling DVDs out of the trunk of his car.
Right.
He's not a young, no spring chicken. But what we did is we just, I think we found the number and called the trauma office. And we said, we're making a documentary. Can we interview Lloyd? And they said, what's it about? And we said, Blockbuster Video. And they said, okay, well, we'll check and we'll call you back. And like an hour later, they were like, yeah, go to his house. Here's the address. And
wow.
So we did. Yeah, I was blown away. But, it was, we're making a movie, and he has a lot of respect for people. Just like I said, making any movie is very hard. Nobody knows that better than Lloyd Kaufman.
Right.
So he let us in, and I've looked up to him for 30, 35 years. Big fan of the old Trauma movies. I haven't kept up lately, but, Toxic Avenger was a big part of my childhood. And so we're geeking out, and it's awesome just to meet him, and he's a nice guy. And then as soon as we turn the cameras on, he snaps into that character. It's not a character, but he just...
That Tromaville president.
Exactly. He's and what you see in our movie is that's what he gave us for about a 90-minute interview.
Wow.
Was just spitting venom, like you said. He hates Blockbuster Video more than I think anyone on the planet. So we were lucky in that regard to get, a villain for the movie. And then our editor had this great idea, because it's almost too negative. He's like, if we keep putting him in throughout the movie, it's just a downer. It's a bummer every time he pops up. So that's why he made that little 120 seconds of Lloyd Kaufman, because that's about as much as you can take. But for me, it's like, what a fun day. I got to hang out with Lloyd Kaufman, talk about movies, talk about making movies. And then when we stopped the interview, he went upstairs at his house and he brought down this Blockbuster uniform that someone had given him because they knew how much he hated Blockbuster. And he shot that whole bit with us where he says, like, welcome to Blockbuster. He's wearing the uniform. We didn't bring him that. He had that. So, I mean, he's a great guy. And he signed a Toxic Avenger poster for me. It's just, wow. It was a cool day. And that is one of the things I love the most about making documentaries. You asked why I make documentaries as opposed to regular movies. But, yeah, I got to spend a day talking about movies with Lloyd Kaufman and another day talking about movies with Kevin Smith and Jamie Kennedy and Paul Scheer. Yeah, and that's my job. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So, if you can, describe the house a little bit, because you can see a little bit. It has to be just organized chaos in that house.
My house or Lloyd Kaufman's house?
Lloyd Kaufman's, not your house.
Okay.
Lloyd Kaufman's house.
Well, you can see a little bit of my house here, but yeah, at his house, it's a nice, for New York, it's huge, and
right.
There's a gargoyle on the outside of the Toxic Avenger, which there's a brief clip of in our doc
right.
that I couldn't believe it when I saw it. We're looking up and down the street, which one is his house? Oh, it's the one with the Toxic Avenger on it, of course. I didn't go upstairs, but it's a pretty big house for New York, and
a lot of memorabilia.
He's got a nice yard, a lot of stuff, a lot of not like the official memorabilia like you or I would collect, but like a lot
right.
of fan art and a lot of stuff people had made for him, and he had some props from the movies and just really cool stuff. And it's kind of like my grandparents' house. Like they had some money and it was nice and it was a fancy place, but like instead of antiques from Japan, it's Toxic Avenger statues. It's
No
swap
samurai
out
swords.
right, swap out all the like antiques your grandparents had for you know a custom painting of Sergeant Kabuki Man, that kind of thing.
Yeah, not that is a crazy movie. Very crazy movie. Not, I don't know if it's as crazy as Samurai Cop, but it's definitely crazy. Let's go back to the Blockbuster for a minute. I want to talk about the actual Blockbuster store. When you go there and you meet these people, and 4 years you become, like you said, part of their family. And it's got to be different than the other documentaries you shot. Of course, you get close with who you're shooting. You learn their ins and outs. But 4 years of this just middle class American family, and the whole family's behind this. What goes on with you? It's got to be a different feeling for you making this than your other documentaries, just with the closeness to the quote unquote characters.
Yeah. The best thing that came out of this was getting to be friends with Sandy. She's so awesome, and she is the heart of that store, and she keeps it going. And like you said, her whole family is involved. Now that it's online, she's got her parents in there packing up shipments, her kids. It's a real family affair, and just getting to meet all these people and become a part of not just the Blockbuster part of their lives, but like we text each other Merry Christmas and Happy Birthday and stuff like that. We're friends, and that was a slow evolution. At first we were the annoying guys with the cameras who kept coming by the store and taking up her time, but we were the first people to ever interview her, because when we started, they weren't the last Blockbuster. There were still a dozen or so left, so no one was poking around, no one was asking. People really started to care when they became the last Blockbuster, but for the couple years before that, it was just us coming by every couple months. Hey, anything new, Sandy? What are you doing this week? Oh, I got to fix these old computers. Okay. Well, we're going to film some of that, okay? And she would be like, all right, I guess. But then when the hype train started going, and CNN is there, and Fox News and MSNBC, and the Ellen DeGeneres show comes, and everybody wants, to talk about Blockbuster, then it's like we were like her, I don't know, like bodyguards. We were protecting her. She would call us and be like, should I do this interview? Should I? I don't know. They want to come and take over the whole store for a whole day. What do you guys think? Because we had been with her with cameras for a couple years before other people called. So it really is like a bond, very different than any other project I've worked on. And I'm really grateful for it, because we are kind of all friends now, and more than that, family. And she's rooting for us, right? The movie came out, and she's very excited when she calls me and says, we sold out of DVDs and you got to bring more.
Wow.
We're all rooting for each other. And that makes me really happy too, because we made this movie. It's like a love letter to Blockbuster Video and to video renting in general.
Absolutely.
But the fact that now, if people buy the DVD from the store, half that money goes to support the store. The other half goes to support us independent artists. So when she's selling DVDs, I feel like we are helping a little tiny bit to keep Blockbuster alive. And to talk about being part of the legacy, that's huge for me.
It's almost a symbiotic relationship. I mean, she sells the movies, part of it goes to her, and she's also furthering your career, so you don't have to have those discussions with your wife when you want to make the film. It's a very symbiotic relationship that you're probably not going to see with other films that you make, or films that you have made in the past. There's not really that need for it after it's over. It always amazes me after I do an interview. I still stay in touch with people that I interview and stuff like that, and ask what we can do to promote. But it almost seems like when you're done with that kind of stuff, you have to move on to the next one. You got to keep going, and I love that, and I hate it, because it introduces you to so many people. But also, when you find that interesting person, or that person that you want to know more about or learn more about, you don't have time for that. And so it's very nice to see that you still are with, talking with these people. You're still in the same town, all that kind of stuff. I go up to Oregon every once in a while, and my wife's from the Northwest, and it's a different kind of world up there. And I would especially think where you're at in Central Oregon, it has that small town feel to it, very much so. Where if you would have shot this in, say, New York City, it wouldn't have the same kind of closeness in it.
No, no, it wouldn't have the heart. I mean, I don't know if I would have done it because honestly, I'm sure that there's some last video store in New York that's still holding out, and somebody's going to make a great documentary about it. But that's not what I wanted to do. That's not what we wanted to do. When we found out the story of this store and how they were always independent, and it was always this mom and pop store, and then we met the people, and then we learned about what happened to Blockbuster Video and why they went out of business. And there's this store with these great people at it that's still doing their best and hanging on. And it has so much to do with this town and like the size of the town, and it just sort of, they've never been forced out by somebody wanting to lease the space that they're in, because it's a small town. There's not,
Right.
We just got our first Chick-fil-A. It's
Oh, really?
slow going over here. Yeah.
How do you feel about that Chick-fil-A?
I haven't been. I'm vegan, so.
Oh,
I
well, yeah, don't go there. That's chicken. I was just
I've
about
heard.
to ask you about Burgerville, but I'm taking that one off the thing now.
Yeah, not always vegan, but not interested. But the town, like, it's the size of town where that was front page news when Chick-fil-A came.
Well, so are you kind of I know this is going to sound like super cheesy to say, but are you kind of like a local hero now? I mean, like a local where people are, I don't know, hero, but a local kind of celebrity. Like, hey, this guy made a movie about our town.
Right. We have been in the entertainment section of the local paper
Nice.
probably 20 times over the past 4 years, and they'll call for updates. What's going on with the movie? When's the movie coming out? That kind of thing. And I am involved in the local film community, and there's a little bit of a film community here, but not much. We have a great film festival that is I don't know, better than it has any right to be for the size of town, and brings in a lot of people from around.
So
the
it's
country.
actually in Ben, the film festival is.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been
And
up to
that's cool.
Astoria?
Yeah, I love Astoria. That's
They
where
have
shot
they
the
have a
Goonies.
great right. They have a great movie theater there though that's still open. A super old theater. I think they show like one movie maybe a day, two movies maybe a day, but it still has the balcony.
Cool.
You have to be 21 to get up into the balcony, but they serve like beer and stuff up there. And then downstairs is the old like 1950s still snack bar and stuff. Like it is a it's one of the coolest ones I've been to. The only other one that I could like compare it to would be the Rialto in Pasadena, California, before they knocked it down. That was another cool one. So to kind of wrap this up, let's talk a little bit about film real quick. I want to ask a couple real quick questions. The memorabilia from the movie, where's it at now?
The Russell Crowe stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, that stuff is still at Blockbuster. They've expanded a little bit. People keep donating Blockbuster memorabilia. So there's a bit of a museum there now that's like, old Blockbuster VHSs and all this Russell Crowe random. It's so random that they have, the hood from Robin Hood and the robe from Cinderella Man. It doesn't make any sense, but they do. And you kind of have to watch either John Oliver's show or our documentary to find out why it's there. But it's all still there, and adding to it in 2020, like I said, not a lot of movies came out on DVD, so they kind of keep expanding the museum part. It's taken over the new release walls a little bit.
So in films with you, what's your favorite movie?
All my favorite movies are parts of trilogies that, the Back to the Futures, the Star Warses, the Indiana Joneses. So excluding trilogies, my favorite movie is That Thing You Do from 1996, directed by Tom Hanks.
Oh, about the band.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Mine's a Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I can't
Great.
I can't say anything about people. So when you talk about the trilogies, though, let's talk about those real quick. Indiana Jones,
Sure.
Star Wars, Back to the Future. Of those, let's kind of compare notes. Favorite Indiana Jones.
Temple of Doom.
Mine is The Last Crusade.
They're pretty equal to me, but Temple of Doom, I saw it at the right age, so it stuck with me more.
Do you remember the arcade game?
I don't.
Yeah, they had a great arcade game that was based on Temple of Doom. Star Wars.
Empire.
I agree. Back to the Future.
Back to the Future 2. It's always the second
Absolutely.
one for me.
I just told my oldest daughter just told me, hey, I watched Back to the Future on Netflix. She's 15. She was like, I watched Back to the Future. It was a good movie. I go, man, the second one's even better. So
yeah, that was the one we redid. The remake we did in early 2020, the pandemic quarantine remake, was Back to the Future 2, because I wasn't going to put all that effort in and not do something with hoverboards, you know?
yeah,
There's no hoverboards in the first one.
I see you have a hoverboard behind you, right next to your Grogu.
Yep.
Favorite documentary?
Oh, that is a tough one. Favorite documentary? I kind of like the ones where the people are in them, the like Super Size Me or the Michael Moore ones, but I love a good music doc. I like the ones about bands.
Well, you could say behind the music then.
Yeah, they all kind of blend together for me, and it's based on the band. There was a really good one, God, and I forget what it's called, but it was about all the rhythm musicians, the backup musicians for like Motown and all that music.
Oh,
I should know the name of it.
no, I was gonna say Muscle Shoals, but that's not it. That's a
That one's great,
That's
too.
a great documentary about
I
music.
love that one.
Yeah, I don't remember. I guess I don't know that one.
I'm gonna Google it real quick.
Okay.
Just so I get
Yeah,
it right.
absolutely. Yeah, Muscle Shoals is a great one. In music wise, the 7-5 is a great documentary about New York City. There's a couple coming out. I like the true crime ones, things like that. But like I said, yours is so fun. The Last Blockbuster is so fun, just because it is just a walk down memory lane the entire way through it. Just everything. And like I said, I didn't even have a Blockbuster when I was a kid, but I have some very strong memories of it as I got into high school, college, military, all that kind of stuff. So,
Well, I appreciate that, and we do these docs, and especially my earlier ones, they're not super mainstream and they're not for everybody, but every once in a while, somebody will tell me, oh, I saw that movie, and they're about niche enough subjects where it's somebody's favorite movie. I don't really care about the critics and the people that hate them, but like if I can make a movie that is somebody's favorite movie, and there's somebody out there that loves Blockbuster Video and it's their favorite thing ever, and so the fact that anybody made a movie about it, this is going to be their favorite movie.
Right.
And so that's for me, that's good enough.
So let's run down your other films real quick, because I want everyone to know what you've done. Now, if I get any of these wrong, stop me when I'm doing it. But so far on my list,
Sure.
I have Sticker Shock.
Yeah, so if you're going off IMDb, there's a bunch of short films in there that are
Okay.
They're not really available, and that one.
That would explain why I could not find them.
Yeah, these are shorts that were done, for film festivals and
Right.
stuff. So hard to find.
But your big ones. Let's talk about your 3 docs, and then let's talk about Project 88 for a second. But let's do your
counts.
3 docs real quick. Just give us a quick overview of your 3 docs.
Sure. My first feature came out in 2017. It's a music doc about a band called The Refreshments. And not a lot of people know who that band is, but they had a hit single in 1996. They went on to do the theme song from King of the Hill. And they have had a steady independent music career ever since. And their story parallels just like what I was talking about with Napster and with the music industry collapsing, because they did get that $1 million record deal and then had to become independent. So we followed their story from the 90s till now, and that movie is called Here's to Life, the story of the refreshments, available on Amazon Prime. And that's it.
Okay. Second doc.
Second doc is Pick It Up Ska in the 90s. I grew up, I was a trumpet player. I played in a bunch of ska bands. For those who don't know, most people are not that familiar with ska music, but bands like Real Big Fish, the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, Sublime, No Doubt, Rancid. These are examples of ska bands. The Specials, if you're a little bit older, Madness. It's a genre that is often looked down upon.
Huge in the 90s. Huge in the 90s.
It really popped off in the 90s. Real Big Fish, Mighty Mighty Boss Tones, all over the radio.
We had Poi Fest when I lived in Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii during the 90s, and we had Poi Fest, and everyone came to Poi Fest. Sublime, No Doubt, Mighty Mighty Boss, everybody came to that one.
So we made a movie about that era, about what happened and how it got so popular and why it burned out so quickly. And that movie has all those bands in it. We got No Doubt and Sublime and Real Big Fish and all that. And that's Pick It Up Ska in the 90s, also on Amazon Prime.
Okay, so 2 you can pick up on Amazon Prime. And then, of course, we've been talking about The Last Blockbuster.
Yep.
And they can find that at a lot of different places. Vudu, Amazon Prime. You can buy it on YouTube. You can buy it on Google Play.
iTunes.
Any
Apple TV.
Have you been in talks at all to do any digital, like to go over to a Netflix or an Amazon or anything like that? Because you already have that set up with The Last Blockbuster.
Yeah, we're trying. You know, it's a weird landscape right now, and there's not a lot of streamers buying independent content. But for now, we're just, it's out where people can rent movies, and we're for sale at Blockbuster Video. We're that's the cool one for me. And we're coming out on VHS here in a couple weeks. That'll be available through Lunch Meat VHS, and they're a really cool company that makes. Apparently, they make modern movies on VHS. It's going to be really like yellow and blue plastic, the whole 9 yards.
And I saw something about a manual rewinder too that was with Lunchbox. They have like a crazy where you can rewind your VHS tapes manually.
Yeah, I just saw that today too. They posted about that. I'm not sure if they made that or if that's a real vintage Blockbuster thing that exists. I'm gonna have to ask them. But yeah, we looked into for our Kickstarter campaign giving away those. They used to have rewinders that looked like race cars, things like that.
Yeah,
and they are so expensive now.
Really,
they're rare because nobody's making them. So we couldn't afford to do that. They're like $100 a pop.
Oh,
and when
wow.
I was a kid, they were like $20.
Yeah, that was the thing. I never really understood that. Not to get off topic, I never really understood those rewinders. Like your VHS rewound, and usually the way it was set up was when it reached the end of the movie, it automatically, when it ran out of reel, it automatically rewound. But
a lot of VCRs would do that, but it's twofold. One, that rewind mechanism, it just burns out the motors in the VCRs.
Okay.
So if you can put it on another machine, your VCR will last longer. And then the other thing, if you're somebody like me that just like to watch movies all weekend, it takes a good 5 minutes to rewind a tape. But if you can pop it out and start the next one while this other machine rewinds the first one, you're saving time. You're watching more movies.
Wow.
So.
Yeah, I never had one of those rewinders when I was a kid, so I guess my parents never thought highly enough of it to get it. So, guys, I think that's going to be the show for this week. Go check out this movie. It is absolutely fantastic. If you ever been to a Blockbuster, if you ever rented movies, if you just have nostalgia for the blockbusters that were in the past, going there on a date night, looking through the aisles, getting popcorn, candy, going back and either watching a great movie or a piece of crap movie that you want to take back automatically. The late fees, the rewind fees, it's all in there. They have heroes and villains in this. It is a great movie. You can watch it with the whole family. I don't think that there's really anything out of place to watch it with the whole family. And if you want to show your kids what it was like when you were growing up before Redbox, before streaming, this is the one to do it. That's going to be it for tonight. That's Taylor. I'm DJ. This was The Last Blockbuster. We'll catch you on the next one, guys. See you later.